All right, well, I'd like to start by welcoming everybody and thank you so much for joining us today at our webinar. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting here today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So welcome again. My name is Kirsty Miller and I'm DiUS's Head of Strategy and Growth. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today and to facilitate this panelist conversation today. Before we get started, maybe we'll do a quick introduction about DiUS. Yeah. So for those of you who already know us at DiUS, hello again. For those of you who are new, DiUS is a technology consulting company that builds custom software and hardware solutions for clients. We have a very unique and broad skill set that spans data, devices, digital design, and AI, making us the perfect choice for clients who are looking to build intelligent products. And then throughout today, Erin, can you please change the slide? Throughout today, obviously we welcome your questions. You are more than welcome to ask them in the chat, or you can ask them on Slido, and we've got the QR code up there, or you can just scan. We can scan the QR code, or you can visit Slido and enter the code. Don't worry about keeping those details to hand because we'll pop them in the chat for you as well. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and meet our panelists. So today I'm joined by Mark Boer, who is my colleague at DiUS, and he is also our AI ML practice lead. Mark has a wealth of experience in helping our clients navigate the world of generative AI. We're also joined by Aaron Vanston. He's the co-founder and chief technology at BuildPass. If you're not familiar with BuildPass, they're an AI-powered operating system that transforms construction site operations. And you may have also seen BuildPass in the news over the last couple of days. They announced a successful seed round raise. A big congratulations to them. And also, they also announced that seed fundraise is earmarked for AI product development. So I'm sure you, like me, are really looking forward to what Aaron will share today. And our third panelist is Associate Professor Mark Green, who is also the Deputy Scientific Director of Research at Monash IVF, which is one of Australia's largest fertility providers, with clinics in every Australian state and across Asia, as well as ultrasound businesses and day hospitals. And Mark is also a group leader at the University of Melbourne and a fellow of the Society for Reproductive Biology. So a very warm welcome and thank you to Mark Boer, Mark Green, and Aaron for joining us today. So we're going to be talking about driving value from generative AI. It's something that we know from our conversations that businesses almost everywhere are trying to do. But demonstrating the value or the business returns can be very challenging. You may have seen, as we did, the recent Gartner survey from earlier in the year that reported that over 50% of organizations say that difficulties estimating or demonstrating the value of AI technologies has been or will be a top barrier to their implementation. So that's why we wanted to hear from some early adopters who have delivered some generative AI use cases into production, how they picked these use cases, and what was their journey to delivering them, and how did they get them operating in a safe and sensible way. So without further ado, let's get started. So we wanted to start, I think, with you, Aaron. Can you tell us a little bit, I've already told everybody who you are, but can you tell us a little bit about you, your organization, and the generative AI initiatives that you've built?
Yeah, of course. No, thank you so much, Kirsty. So yeah, BuildPass, as you've talked about, started in construction. So my role there is very much the co-founder and CTO. So very much underpinning some of the AI strategy that we are doing there today. But BuildPass is really kind of hitting a market for construction, which has previously kind of been left behind digitally as well. So we're very much looking at how we can bring some top tier practices to an industry that's been digitally left behind. More recently, as you've announced and also messaged as well about our raise as well. So recently kind of closing out our raise really to help fuel that as well. So we strongly believe that AI will help kind of short circuit this experience here. So allowing the accessible nature of digital platforms to construction and doing that in AI itself. So from our experiences, we can get into obviously to it throughout the entire panel, but yeah, we've been doing a lot of different generative AI experiments, more than I can put in my hands to kind of count as well. So through image recognition, through to summarization of reports, building out, understanding and analysis of certain of our customers' data as well. So lots of different experiments within the construction sector itself, and very much driving those core experiences with our users.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that, Aaron. Thank you. And now let's go over to Mark Green for a very, I guess, really different use case, but just as interesting. So Mark, can you answer the similar question, a little bit about you, Monash, and what you guys have been doing with Gen AI?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kirsty. So as you've heard, I work for Monash IVF. Many people will be aware that we've got an increasing rate of infertility worldwide, and especially in Australia. And so our company really is one of the biggest providers here in Australia. So my role is really to bring some new technologies into the group and really put forward, I guess, and help patients through quite a stressful experience. So anything we can do in terms of the patient experience, their support, or any technologies in the lab. And so, of course, patients are more into AI and use of that now, and it doesn't matter what app you're on, and there's using some form of AI. And so really we wanted to lean into that and to help our patients feel familiar, and more importantly, have access to us, hopefully 24/7 for some of the key pieces of information. So AI seemed like a really good for us to start getting engaged with.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And now I wanted to ask you, Mark, the same question. And obviously, you see across all our clients. So I wanted, for you to be able to share what we're seeing in how people are using Gen AI.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Kirsty. So thanks again. My name's Mark Foer. I'm a client engagement principal at DiUS, part sales, and I also look after the machine learning practices, as Kirsty mentioned. And I think I'm quite fortunate in that dual role, in that I do get to speak to a lot of customers, large and small, Mark and Aaron being examples of them, about how they're applying or would like to apply Gen AI in their organizations, the challenges they might be facing with delivery, successes along the way, and couple that with managing the practice as well. So I'm really lucky to be working with a very talented AI machine learning team, a bunch of specialists and other developers that have really lent into this space, and they're really scanning the market for the latest tools. We're seeing announcements all the time in terms of the latest GPT, 4.0, Claude versions going out there, keeping up to date with the latest research and papers to essentially understand where the latest thinking and tools are available are, and more importantly, how do you apply that in a real world context? Mark and Aaron have spoken a bit about some of the applications, summarization. I think, Aaron, you mentioned, Mark, you touched on, the Monash IVF story there, which is very much a conversational chatbot around there. So, as consultants, we work with customers to build products, and, we build that alongside them and for them. But in terms of product development for ourselves, we've seen a lot of demand for conversational interfaces, and the Gen AI word chatbots are back. And you've heard me say that a few times. I looked across our initiatives, actually, Kirsty, and a third of our Gen AI initiatives involve some form of natural language input.
Yeah.
So what we've actually done for ourselves, just really quickly, is build an accelerator, for a lack of a better term. And what that is really foundational kind of capability, I guess, for a Gen AI chatbot. So there's a basic UI, authentication, guardrails, observability built in, really, so we can, and along with our customers, build chatbot solutions to test and get feedback really quickly. So we invested quite heavily in that space.
Yeah, that's true. And I kind of like, I'm not as close as you are, Mark, but I would agree with you. We have so many conversations about document summarization and natural language interactions that are definitely two of the most popular that we're seeing right now. Okay, so we want to stop for a minute and do a quick audience poll because I guess, we're talking to a range of people today that have got quite a lot of experience with generative AI. And we kind of wanted to take a poll to see where the audience is at. So Erin, would you mind launching that poll and people can go ahead and we'll share the results once everybody's taken the time to go ahead and answer that poll. I'm really interested to see if this aligns with kind of like, I don't know what's being reported in the market. So let's see. Because according to, what you read in the media, everybody's doing Gen AI. So I just want to see if that's the same. Erin will share the results once we've had enough people. Yes, I've just seen a question about the recording. Definitely, we'll be sharing the recording with everybody who registered and attended. That gets sent out after the conclusion of the webinar. So definitely. Erin, is that poll ready to share the results? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's about what I would expect. I don't know about you guys, but definitely that's what I would expect to see. The majority of people are actually doing something with Gen AI, which is really consistent with our experience when we talk with organizations. And then also to a lot of people, not the majority, but a lot of people are in that early proof of concept stage. So yeah, that's very consistent with what we're seeing. So thank you everybody for that. All right, so we're going to move on and ask about picking use cases where people start. So I want to ask Mark Green first. How did you identify where to start with Gen AI and how did you kind of land on your first use case?
Yeah, I guess as a company, we were excited by that. And something that we were looking at was all sorts of different areas and expertise outside of the field of pre-production. So the first thing we did was really put together a think tank, and we interviewed and asked a few people to come along from different streams. DiUS were one of those people. And so really then we started with thinking about what the problems, solutions that our business needed and what kind of technologies we could have to enable that. And then through that think tank session, which was just a couple of hours, we came up with a couple of top ideas that we'd like to push forward, and one of those being looking more closely at use of AI, specifically for us in terms of use of a chatbot function for people going through genetic testing, potentially. So there's lots of information out there. It was just trying to have something that was accessible for people with lots of good interface for them to feel like it's a personalized conversation before actually them being passed on to our actual genetic counselors. So yeah, that was how we did it. We did it just from the ground up in terms of just having a think tank, getting some problems and thinking about how we can apply that AI technology the best way. I should say that while this is the first one off the runway, there are lots of other ideas that we can see to utilize AI. And I think this was sort of just dipping our toe in to see whether we thought this was going to be fit for purpose for us. And it's worked really well now. And now we're actually more confident in terms of going into some of those other ideas in the next few months, which is great.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I actually know the answer to this question before I ask it, and it's very different. So I'm going to ask Aaron, how did you come up with how you started with generative AI within your business?
Yeah. I think it is a very different, I guess, answer in that regards, and that's I think the part of the differences in the nature of the startup. But for us, actually, we kind of first of all wanted to understand, well, what is AI first of all as a team? So how we very much kind of built the muscle internally to use AI for our own day jobs and understand kind of the limitations and what it was good at and what it didn't do and what it did do, and then use that to go forward. So a lot of our AI development features have actually been mostly development led. So all the dev team is very much empowered to kind of think of an idea, work with some feedback that we might have got from our customers to then kind of address that using the likes of AI or generative AI to get that through. So it actually started with a hack day. It wasn't themed as a hack day, but we ended up having about 4 different submissions that were all AI based as well. And so might I mentioned too about developing that muscle early days was actually, yeah, working likes with DiUS as well, but just also just testing out some of the online tools with AWS and OpenAI, Anthropic as well. But going back to the hack day, we had a wide range of really useful stuff with our customers. So understanding and doing image analysis to understand what's inside of images, building templates, doing some text summaries, all the way through to building a Wordle game using completely backed by AI. That was actually really fun. So really just kind of testing the waters and then seeing what sticks, sending it out to production and actually then trying it with our customers to see actually, well, what do they want to actually hear with AI? So a bit of I guess, a breadth approach to that and having that flexible understanding, the curiosity of how AI actually works.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, yeah. We've seen both approaches, I think, across our business. And so, yeah, with that, I would like to ask Mark about, like, given all the different clients we've worked with to implement Gen AI, like what's been successful from what you've seen about prioritizing which problems to attack first?
Yeah, okay. Firstly, if we assume that we're really focused on ROI and achieving ROI, I think we've got to acknowledge that the only way you're going to really achieve that is if you pick a solution or a problem that's most likely going to make it to production, essentially, right? So if you've got multiple ideas like Mark had through the think tank or Aaron, from the ground up, there's different ways of prioritizing that. We love the DVF framework. We use that across all our initiatives, and many of you might be familiar with that through IDEO. But desirability first. Does it address a need? Is there a market for it? Can it be designed and built in a way that's user friendly? And will it be used? The feasibility questions around the latest LLMs, for example, can they generate the output accurately and safely? Do you have the data and content to serve to those type of models? And can that solution be integrated into your application or system as well? And the very important V, being viability, is the question around whether you can afford to build and run it, and does the cost benefit kind of stack up, I guess, in the long term. We've seen a lot of organizations use that to score their ideas and see which ones score the highest overall. We've also seen them take that and map that across the complexity, effort, and the value/impact axes to see essentially which ones do deliver some value but are relatively low complexity and risk as the first cab off the rank, if that's the first one you're working on. So in order to do that, though, you've got to, I guess, understand what's Gen AI good at today. What's it proven to solve, and the summarization one, as you touched on, Kirsty and Aaron, it's really good at that. We've used it on a number of occasions. Knowledge-based search, question answering works really well as well. So if any of your problems align to that, then you've got a pretty good chance of succeeding. We've also seen organizations look at internal versus external use cases, focusing sometimes first on internal, but over the journey it's been a bit of a mixed bag. Looking at the initiatives that we've been involved in, it's about 60% internal and 40% external. In Mark's case, they started off with an external one with that chatbot, but they did it in a way that was still managed from a risk perspective. The chatbot's constrained to answer questions very early in that kind of genetic testing process around understanding and discovery. So the questions they might ask, the answers are more generic as opposed to, what are my test results, essentially. So they did that in a way that was really manageable and kind of acceptable from a risk perspective. And, as it succeeds, build in digital capability on top of that.
Yeah. I think that, it's really interesting when someone starts their journey, and I really, there's a common thread across Mark Green, Mark Foers, and Aaron's answers, which is all about, really thinking about what problems do we have, and then how well Gen AI can solve them. And I think a lot of people are really tempted sometimes to just go ahead and just start with something and not think about whether or not it's going to be delivered into production. Okay, so we want to ask another audience poll. because we're going to be talking next about, I guess some challenges and how to overcome them when you're wanting to put something into production. So we want to ask everybody, like, what do they see as the biggest challenge to adopting generative AI within their business? Thanks, Erin. And I have to say, it's quite hard to pick one of these, because usually it's a multi-factored kind of thing. So I'll be really interested to see what people see as the biggest. I'd be really surprised if someone said they hadn't encountered any challenges, but let's see, right? I don't know. Erin will share the poll as soon as we've had enough people answer. Thanks, Erin. Ooh. Okay. Someone did say they hadn't encountered. Well, that's good for them. I think that's awesome. They haven't encountered significant challenges. I would say I was thinking that navigating regulatory or compliance hurdles was going to be higher, but I think it really does depend on the kind of data and the industry you're operating in. But yeah, I guess really all in all, seeing a spread across the different categories. I don't know what you think, Mark Foer, but I think that's really consistent with what we're seeing. It really is horses for courses, right? It depends on who you are, what your industry is, and what kind of solution you're doing.
Definitely, Kirsty. Just looking at those results right now, data quality and availability is a little bit lower than typical AI as well. So that's quite consistent with what we're seeing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on to unpack some of these challenges and talk to our panel about them. So we're going to, I guess we're going to talk to Erin first, and I want to ask you, Erin, about any organizational resistance that you experienced once you kind of talked to the team about the plans to adopt generative AI.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting one, obviously coming in as a founder and us pushing this as well. So both myself and the other co-founder, Matt, have been very on board and very curious from day one. So it was very much that, about how we present it to the team, I guess the vision as well. Is it just a fad? Is it a phase? Is it actually going to be something part of our core strategy? And obviously, the spoiler alert is very much part of us moving forward. So I guess the thing that we think about is that the resistance itself did come, like we had a tiny little bit, but it was more from those I didn't think properly understood the final use cases or what possibly could be done as well. So those that were almost choosing to necessarily not using it, and that's completely fine. I think it's really important to have a bit of a balance of people that do want to be curious about AI, but also those that are kind of a bit more skeptic about it, because I think that's actually quite healthy balanced as well. So for us, it was just more about kind of having a bit of a balance like this. These AI tools, both internally but also to our customers, aren't necessary to displace any particular people or roles. In fact, it's more about how we can actually aid and assist those particular tasks and doing the more boring tasks with us as well. And really just kind of encouraging a bit of curiosity here, and that kind of then helped us break that down as well. But yeah, I'd say like for the most part, we didn't have too much friction, but it was actually something that I didn't perceive necessarily happening, and was a bit of the internal organization, kind of a bit of a wariness of adopting AI, both from our own use cases, but also our customers as well.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask Mark Green the same question, because obviously it's a very different type of organization. Did you experience any organizational resistance?
Yeah, I think it was more about curiosity than resistance. So I think some people were probably over ambitious about what they thought AI could do. They'd watched a lot of sci-fi and thought this was great and this was just going to rule the world. And other people were very cautious about it. And then depending on what sort of area they're coming from, whether in the executive, then they were worried about the cost. I guess our information technology team were more worried about the implementation. And then our doctors thought this was great. Our genetic counselors worried about their jobs. So everybody brought some baggage, I guess, in terms of what they'd like to discuss. But the way that we did it was we were just very open about, look, this is just an idea. Can you please feed into what you think it would be useful for you? What are your concerns? And then just walk through it and make sure that those were really involved with where we were trying to land it in the company and how we were using it, really were part of that development team from day one, and making sure that they were happy with what they wanted to do. And then, as Aaron said, really it was about just replacing some of those more mundane tasks, or in our case, it was really the basic information that the counsellors, for example, give to our patients in every meeting, whether that could be taken offline. And also, we're throwing a lot of information at people, especially medical information. And so that chatbot allowed them to do it in their own time, in their own way, before they came in and felt to engage with our counsellors to take that next step or to have that detailed information. So it was still keeping it very high level, accessible information, but then, of course, utilising their time better with our patients, for example, to make sure that we could then spend that time to talk about their specific cases or what they'd like out of it, without having that redundant information in the way, to take that time. So that was a real positive that everybody was keen to do. So yeah, I don't think it was really resistance. It was just a lack of understanding or really benchmarking what they thought it could do. And then a little bit was about understanding the implementation pathway and what would we do with it? How would we test it? And what would the best way to really sort of put that business case together to then see if we wanted to roll it out any further. So I think it was a mentality of, we'd love to do it. Let's try something quick and simple, see if we can get a win on the board. And if we do, then we'll move forward step by step with everybody.
Yeah. I want to ask Mark Foer now. Have you seen any organizational resistance across our clients? Maybe you can share a little bit about that to kind of round out this subject.
Yeah, okay. I think Mark and Aaron largely covered the curiosity angle and, where concerns can come from different levels. And they've done a really great job, as they mentioned, about how they've introduced and made it safe for people as well. I think, Kirsty, if we look at kind of where we've come, how far we've come over the last, and I think back to when ChatGPT was first kind of announced, a lot of our customers were blocking it, whether it's from their staff or the developers. And at the time, there was concerns around data privacy and leaking of, company IP. And, I think a lot of the major providers out there have come a long way in addressing those concerns. Now, as people are experimenting with it, I guess the concerns or the resistance will potentially come from CIOs, folks, data, cyber, risk teams that have concerns about, are we introducing additional risk or new vulnerabilities, especially with chatbots like bot attacks and whatnot. And as long as we're addressing those concerns, which we really should be anyway, then we should be able to alleviate them. Hallucinations are a real thing. The black box nature, as we know, of LLMs and, the risk of harm, that drives a lot of those concerns, which, what Mark mentioned about just running experiment really quickly. We find POCs and pilots being really useful in this space. To showcase, put it in the hands of users and key stakeholders so they can see it in action, interact with it, test it out for themselves. Very early on, our clients and stakeholders were saying to us, stop telling me about, Gen AI, show me, right? Yeah. And then when we showed them through showcases and whatnot, then they asked us, oh, okay, can you set it up so we can play with it? Or I want to show this person. So, kind of that showing and giving an environment for people to play with it and experience it's really important for adoption and understanding, and overcoming some of that resistance. And, what we found with chatbot POCs especially is we're building a lot more than we would in the past. So we're building guardrails in, we're demonstrating, additional capabilities in there just because of the risk factor. But it's a very useful tool. A small investment of a few weeks, you can get a pilot going, or a POC, I should say, pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I feel like there's like parallels that you can draw, Mark. Like the OpenAI ChatGPT, when it first came out, you're like, why would I use this? What is this for? And then instantly, it's just so easy to use. You're like, why would I not use it? And I think that's, kind of like the parallel for our clients. They're like, okay, we've seen ChatGPT, we understand how that works, but how am I going to apply it to my business? And as soon as they kind of walk through one use case and they figure out how easily it can be slotted in, then, everybody starts seeing possibilities everywhere. But of course, there is always, when talking about with generative AI and machine learning, is the challenge around data, right? We at DiUS have banged on about how important data is to, making sure machine learning works well for, I don't know how long, Mark, we've been saying that. There's actually, the same issue that you can have when you're working with generative AI. So I'd be interested to ask Aaron first, did you encounter any data challenges when you were working with Gen AI?
Yeah. I think I guess the traditional saying, I think, is bad data in, bad data out as well. So something that we faced early on was that there was almost this lack of data within the construction sector itself. So whether it be use cases of image tagging or maybe summarization of some of the documents going on site, or rather even voice, there was this need to almost build the step before AI, and that is how do we get more data in to help us actually have better processes and refinements of that. Ironically, we then can also use AI to help build that. So build a pipeline where you might say, for instance, when a construction site photo is uploaded, we would then summarize that first, build out kind of keyword tags, and actually get all of that data in a good spot, and then use that and then further kind of next steps as well with the models as well. So I think for us, we were really fortunate that we started AI after having a really extensive digital platform already in there to help host all of this data, help collect it. And it's just more about that acceleration step, because for us, if we didn't have that platform, I guess starting from nothing would have been a bit harder. And then kind of working through then how we then actually apply the final AI steps was much easier, because we had this wealth of data now prepped as well to go forward. So I guess a bit of a different challenge, and again, using AI to help solve that was actually an interesting thing to kind of help us get our data into a really nice, healthy spot. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's very ironic almost, isn't it, really? Yeah. but that is true, and we're seeing a lot of that as well. I guess Mark Green, you work in healthcare, obviously. It's data and all of those things that come around it. It's a bit of a hot button topic. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your data challenges.
Yeah, so I guess there's been lots of things always on the news about data breaches, especially when it's coming to medical records, and that was one of our ultimate fears, was how do we protect our patients? And so really we engaged really early on with DiUS in terms of where would we place this information? I guess the application we're currently discussing is the chatbot. So we're not actually trying to collect lots of information or needing to mine that. So we were quite lucky. But having said that, of course, it's a medical legal issue in terms of what the information we're providing. Probably the biggest worry is that Dr. Google can give you anything, and it stresses patients out. And so we didn't want the chatbot pulling from information anywhere off the internet. So the way that we dealt with that was that we used all of our patient information sheets and all our letters and all of the information that we are very confident, and websites that we absolutely trust, and locked down that as the source of information for the chatbot, and then spent a long time with our genetic counselors, for example, looking at some of the answers, going through how they're responding. So I guess it was the data we were trying to provide, or the information really had to be accurate because it's medical information. And so we looked at how best to, I guess, limit it to where we felt that was the best information for our patients. And also, I guess, importantly, having an exit point for the chatbot where it didn't go beyond that, and it wanted to then say, hey, come and talk to one of our people. Now I'm gonna pass you over. So knowing your limitations, I think about the data, not trying to keep a lot of the data in there, I guess, in terms of what we wanted. We did want, and still looking at whether the kind of conversation that someone's had whilst engaging with that chatbot, for example, can then be part of what then is sent on to the genetic counselor, so they know the sort of base level information, and that is a step that we're looking to do. So really good to sort of hand them off to a human in terms of the more personalized information, but the basic information and data, we absolutely want to make sure it was real, it's true. And in our area of genetics, it's moving really, really fast. So something that you Google today is going to be out of date very fast. So we needed to make sure that it's the most up-to-date information in terms of the way that people access the services, what kind of results they get. So really just keeping a tight control was what we really needed from the offset.
Yeah, and I think that's, also, I wanted to call out, that's a really good, I guess, example of you thinking through the user experience, what was going to be helpful to them, and, when they needed to speak to a human. I think you guys were really thoughtful about which part of the process and what data was needed. And I think that's a really important point to call out. Yeah. Okay, I would like to go back to Mark Foer. Mark, I wanted to ask you about data challenges for generative AI and kind of a little bit, I think it's important to talk about how these differ from data challenges that we've been experiencing in traditional machine learning.
Okay. So I guess when we think about the data needs or the challenges outside the protection of data that Mark has already covered, in general, the data needs for traditional machine learning are far greater. We do a lot of supervised learning still, and that requires a large data set of labeled, kind of data to train those models. Whereas with Gen AI, as we know, a lot of that training's been done for you. So you would have heard of foundation models or large language models like Claude and Gemini and GPT-4o and all those type of models that are available out there. So instead of training those models, what we're doing, and Mark alluded to this as well, is we're preparing the knowledge base or our data, our corpus, in a format that those LLMs can understand, right? So there's still a significant amount of data preparation and processing that's still involved. The data we're dealing with now is largely unstructured. There's different document types, different formats, stored in different places. We often find ourselves scraping websites for content, extracting content from PDFs, for using OCR tools like Textract and others is useful, and handling data that might exist in tables as well and processing that before you send that to an LLM. So from a data processing perspective, there's still work to be done there. Mark talked a little bit about, trusted websites and content that the LLM or the chatbot should, form its response around. So that's a RAG implementation. Vector databases are involved there. So there's some work to be done there to chunk, your data into something that's searchable. And then only those relevant parts are passed to the LLM. So, kind of ultimately the response is as accurate as possible. So similarities in that there's a lot of data prep. Another similarity is you'll discover a lot of issues with your data as well. It's a good opportunity to find what they are, even in the Gen AI world. On a number of occasions with FAQs and, enterprise knowledge search, we found information that kind of contradicts each other. Yeah. Sometimes, as Mark alluded to, sometimes the content's out of date. Sometimes the information's really confusing. On a few occasions, we thought the LLM was incorrect, but it proved to be correct based on the content that it was presented. So, in terms of running these experiments and kind of using your data for generative AI purposes, it's actually an opportunity to see where some of that content might be misleading or needs some attention. So what we've seen is organizations going and correcting it, and then re-indexing, re-embedding, and then deploying it again.
Yeah, and I think that also underlines Aaron's point about, making sure you have a good data foundation in place in order to make the best of the technology. It's worth investing that time. Now, I guess, very, very much related to data, but also, I guess maybe in addition to is the issue of, what happens when you work in a highly regulated environment like healthcare. So Mark Green, I wanted to ask you, obviously, Monash IVF being in healthcare. So what other considerations did you've already mentioned some, but what considerations were there for Monash as an organization?
Yeah, I guess first and foremost, probably the doctors felt that it was very important that we had the conversation in terms of medical legal risk, in terms of what we felt the very subtle differences in the output could change the meaning of something and what they're saying. So it needs to be highly accurate. And so that's why we spent a lot of time crafting that conversation. I think the tone, very important, that we needed to consider in terms of the language that we're providing. It's no point spitting back a lot of high technical language to people. So it was making it accessible, but really for the regulatory side of things, it was just making sure that the advice that we were giving was robust. It was founded in knowledge and the knowledge that we trusted. And that was very important for us and for our patients. So yeah, I think those were the main ones. I mean, ethically as well, what we were asking people could ask our chatbot around obviously different diseases and disorders. So again, we had to be mindful of what chatbot might put back in terms of things. If you're talking about diseases that have a high incidence, maybe at different ethnicities, different ages of people, And so then it came into sort of what kind of guardrail functions were behind the scenes to maybe make sure they did get the correct answer, and they didn't hallucinate and just merge things together. So really, it was just accuracy of information, and knowing its boundaries, knowing when to stop was the important thing, that it didn't just try and make something up. Well, that was extremely dangerous. But also, I think the way that we could give them extra information. So if they wanted to dive in, we could, for example, have the function to say, here's another link. Did you want to ask this? Because people don't know what they don't know. So we were trying to find a chatbot that was able to be a bit intuitive in terms of providing that sort of next step for people. It's not an area that you do every day. You don't probably go and get your genetics tested every day. So yeah, that's not something that we felt people needed to know themselves. We want to try and provide that and sort of say, did you want to know about this, or was this useful? And then here's a resource. So trying to provide resources more than just the FAQ kind of style that we have in a very long, dry website, which would be pretty impenetrable. So yeah, we wanted to be engaging, accessible for people, and really just intuitive to help them get to at least the point where they felt comfortable to take that next step and to talk to someone. I think that was the main thing around the healthcare thing, was just accuracy of information. We're very conscious that we cannot misstep in terms of when someone's health and the decision about diagnostic, and so we have to tighten that in, which is obviously probably very different to the use case that Aaron's currently doing with asking and testing it that way.
Yeah, and yeah, that's true. And I actually wanted to ask Aaron about that as well. So obviously, you know, it's not the same, but what about in construction? Were there any regulatory considerations for you guys?
Yeah, I think it's very much not the same in terms of, obviously we're dealing on very different scales, but like we also do have things like PII coming in, you know, health records as well. And so some things that, you know, workers are on site, there's a bunch of details that we're passing around. The way that we approached this was almost limiting the use cases to almost necessarily avoid the detailed spots that we potentially shouldn't be touching or not quite sure we should be doing just yet. So very much the on-rails experience of AI, only providing perhaps no ways to break out. So some cases we do have more text-based conversations with an AI, and we put a lot of effort into kind of preventing, you know, prompt injection and the concept of breaking out of the LLM to ask questions. Now, in this case, the actual bot itself didn't have access to anything that was potentially quite sensitive. It's actually, you know, you actually can get quite far with generative AI. I think that's the beauty of it. You don't need to provide a bunch of sensitive data to some of these parts to get the job done. From our point of view, construction itself, there's been a lot of extra pressure in asking around the sensitivity of data, and you know, there's been a lot of data breaches in Australia in particular, and so everyone's on top of the mind about, well, what's happening, where am I feeding this data, what's actually going on. So there's more questionings and probing. We deal with a lot of safety requirements and processes as well. So with our AI, we had to be very careful about, obviously, you know, giving the caveats and also ensuring that they do get some of the stuff done, checked properly, and what we call the human in the loop approach, where, you know, we will give an output from an AI, but very much the concept before you save or before you whatever, it's actually the human doing that, the last bit of interaction to kind of properly put that in and actually have the eye over that. And it's really important for us to not necessarily just throw automatic AI stuff behind the scenes and I'm not sure what's going on. The observability isn't quite there. So yeah, it's a bit different. We're dealing with different types of data, and also our use cases are very narrow, but that's almost done on purpose so we could try to avoid some of the, I guess, the more dangerous parts of more generative AI where we didn't quite learn or know at that stage of time. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting because you mentioned observability. So what, like, how do you add in those guardrails of observability? Like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's multiple different pieces. Like when we got started, we were just more curious about what's actually being asked to these AIs, if there is an open prompt, or more rather, if anyone's using these tools and features that we are actually using to help build some of that KPI. So every bit of UI, or rather AI interaction, gets logged into our systems, and so we can kind of see that. We're almost encouraged to kind of review kind of how people are using it. Really interestingly, like in our use case in construction, sometimes the people using our bit of AI is probably the first interaction ever with AI. Whilst ChatGPT and actual systems are getting more popular, it's not something that crosses quite often with this industry. And so seeing them explore the limits of AI was actually really kind of curious from that point of view. But in terms of the actual, again, coming back down to the observability piece, it's like, what's logged in, what's logged out, kind of actually having that and doing some sense checking, you know, putting in some extra guards if we kind of see it kind of getting slightly off track or not quite, you know, constructive in that regards. And then again, really enforcing the human in the loop mentality here. So having the concept of, if there's something that, us as the BuildPass staff can actually be then in between of some of these AI prompts and responses is actually very fine. But also them, so that having them actually understand a bit of that output before they actually go ahead and save it or just distribute some of these AI, generative results as well.
Yeah. So yeah, Mark, what about in your FAQ chatbot solution? So what guard, like you've talked a little bit about it, but specifically what guardrails and observability did you guys build in?
Yeah, so I guess that was quite important for us. We didn't really understand the difference between the chatbot itself and the LLM and then the platform that was being deployed on it, and then understanding that there's a bit of, I guess, discrepancy sometimes between where the guardrails are sitting. So obviously we tried really hard to try and break that system in terms of what kind of crazy questions people could ask. And sometimes the guardrails would hit in from either, for example, we use the Azure platform or we use the actual LLM. So it was trying to make sure what was breaking it. And sometimes it's very simple terms. So we had to think about, as I said, we're talking about genes, we're talking about diseases, we're talking about ethnicities, we're talking about, design babies, potentially in terms of what people want to know. So they're asking very strange questions and, will my baby have 3 legs kind of thing. So we have to think about what kind of sensible answers that are coming back from that. But yeah, the guardrails it was a lot of testing and having the ability to see behind the scenes in terms of those questions and what were the common approaches. And then talking to obviously the experts in the company, which are the genetic counselors in this case, and letting them come in and sort of refine the question, response, and the level of information, because we also didn't want the chatbot just spewing endless information. So it was enough information, but not too much. So it's sort of Goldilocks a bit of information. So that was really, really important. And then just having this really fast iterative process of working with the DS team to kind of just curate that. And that was good because we started small. We kept the base of information tight, which meant that actually there was probably not too much for it to go off piece for, but when it did, we could see where the guardrails were and fix it pretty quick. So it was a very good, fast, iterative process, and then got a very good product very fast, which was quite surprising for us. But yeah, learning what the guardrails are and testing it to ultimately to what people ask is key.
Yeah, and I think you called out like there's guardrails that you guys can introduce, but sometimes they're inbuilt into the services that you come. So you need to learn a lot about all of the different pieces and how they're put together and what's coming from where, and which is where obviously observability comes in. So we get a lot of questions about guardrails and observability. So Mark, I was going to ask you to share a little bit about how we've been approaching these two areas that we get asked about at the moment all the time.
Okay, so I think, and Aaron and Mark Green covered a lot of that already. But when we think about guardrails and observability, they're 2 ways to really help us essentially manage risk and give us confidence to deploy our solutions. That's what they're there for. They both touched on, guardrailing from inputs and the outputs. So inputs, making sure it's, staying within topic in certain scenarios and making sure there's not harmful language isn't being used. In the context of a chatbot, that's really important to put those guardrails in place because you've got users interacting with your system quite freely. So it's more important to have, the proper kind of safety nets in place over there. One of the things that the importance of observability here as well, and for us, it's about, being able to monitor, understand and manage your LLM applications end to end and analyze it really to debug and resolve issues. One of the things that Mark Green alluded to before was around Azure services that might give you some content filtering capabilities. We found a scenario where a particular question was blocked and from a user, and it looked like a quite a simple question, but given the type of questions that are asked in the genetic testing world, a lot of acronyms, whether that's the name of the genetic disease or the test, we weren't sure whether it was the guardrails we put in place. So having the observability kind of tools in there, we're able to kind of pinpoint, kind of the root cause, and it ended up being, a content filtering service from Azure that blocked it rather than the guardrails that we put in place. So we arrived at pretty quickly, that conclusion really quickly. And, we had the option to kind of adjust the severity levels to let certain things go through and whatnot. But that's very much an experimentation step, but having that observability built in, the ability to do that meant that we could diagnose, trace problems to find root causes really quickly. And the other nice thing about these tools is it can really help you understand the patterns of usage as well. So looking for opportunities for optimization and cost as well. So knowing how many calls are being made. And like we said, once you understand how it works end to end and it's out in the wild, looking at your logs, looking at your metrics, latency, it's a really good way and an opportunity to optimize your solution overall.
Yeah. Definitely. And I think we're going to go on and talk with cost a little bit, but I want to change things up and go to a poll, because I want to make sure that we get to all of the things that we wanted to discuss before we get to the end of the time, and also have questions. So I just want to, we want to talk about measuring success really quickly. So I wanted to ask everybody, like, what metrics or success factors are most important for measuring the success of your initiatives in your organization. And we'll talk a little bit about what Mark Green and Aaron have done. I really want to see what people say to this one. Wait a few more seconds and then we'll go ahead and share the results once they come through. Thanks, Aaron. I was actually expecting the top two to be the most popular, and I think those are the top three, in fact, are the ones that we see the most. But I'm going to ask Mark Green, how are you measuring the success of your initiative?
Yeah, so I guess ours is a little bit easier maybe than Aaron's, in the sense that we're the patients are looking at using a service, so we can actually have some hard data around how many then make appointments and follow up with specialists, but also those that buy, for example, some of the testing platforms. But that's sort of more the quantitative information we get really fast, but probably what we look for as well as the qualitative information around the patient experience and their journey, and whether it's easier, was it accessible for them. So we do a lot of polling of our patients and surveying to make sure along their journey how they're going. So probably those are the two sort of endpoint deliverables. And so really, of course, in terms of the things that we just saw on the poll there, probably definitely a financial impact potentially on cost savings of our staff, in terms of not having to have that sort of redundant conversation every time for the first 5 minutes. So we can quantify that and maybe repurpose our staff or have better time or different workflow with patients into the business, which is really interesting. So as Mark highlighted, like using that data when we've got enough to feed back in can actually change how we engage with our customer. But yeah, just seeing how people are purchasing or buying through the system, but also their experience. Those are probably our hard measures when we come to whether it's actually been successful.
Yeah, awesome. And what about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I think it's similar but also different, I guess, as well. So we had a heavy focus on, I guess, the quantitative feedback. So understanding a bit more about metrics of like jobs to be done with our platform. So sometimes, as an example, with the construction sites, people take a lot of photos. They're kind of uploaded into daily diaries, and the concept of being able to recall a single photo, we actually used AI to help automatically tag and summarize what's in the photo, so then they could then search for that. So an example KPI for that would be like, well, time to find that photo. Now, that's a multi-step process because obviously they can manually tag them themselves, but we're using AI to help automate that as well. So we actually have a bunch of different kind of smaller KPIs almost per feature. And then it also came back down to just the conversations with some of our customers as well. So because some of our features are realized over the course of the entire usage of our platform, sometimes it's hard to nail down an exact KPI or a metric to find that. So it's just more about, overall, are you feeling like these are helping you or getting in the way, they're hindering, all of those different conversations, and just getting an overall positive feel. But for us, it was very much about, the experiences that wow our customers, and then providing, how can I get more data or more efficient usage of the platform through AI as well. So really about, jobs to be done and how we can positively impact that number so they can get back to building construction sites and not spending time on software.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. And I think it's really important. Like, you do have to have those hard metrics, but those qualitative conversations and the feedback that you're getting, like that Mark Green spoke about, I mean, sometimes that's almost better in a way, Okay. I guess we just got a couple more things to touch on before we finish. I will say, if we don't get to answer any of your questions, we will answer them and then send them out in another post. I think that's probably what we'll have to do. But I wanted to just really quickly, we might skip over generative AI costs. Sorry, everyone. I really wanted to make sure that we didn't miss asking Mark Green and Aaron, like, what's next? So I want to ask Aaron first, because I know he's got a lot to say on this subject. What's next for generative AI in your organization?
Hopefully a lot. So we obviously, as we just discussed at the start, we did actually do a recent kind of raise around that. So again, building the platform before AI was actually for us lucked in kind of into a smart move. We have now a really extensive ecosystem of understanding how construction works, but we truly believe that AI and generative AI solutions can help short circuit and also kind of speed up some of these inefficiencies in construction sites. So the way that we look at AI moving forward is quite grandiose and quite big. We're looking to move into new markets. We're looking to do different things. We're looking to almost challenge how construction is done today, and using generative AI to help do that. So some examples that, a construction site is very video, or rather very visual and very, voice heavy. There's a lot of conversations going on. There's a lot of things going on visually, defects in construction sites, site plans, etc. And so we believe, why is there a need to sit down at a computer to enter the details that you've just observed on the construction site? Can we build in a bit of a tool to help automatically capture some live video feeds and use your voice automatically to start building out what is your construction site today, and what are the actions that need to be done? What are the deficiencies that need to be fixed and corrected as well? And kind of challenge, like, more traditionally how, I guess, site management and site operation management is done today to make more efficiencies as well. So that's one of our bigger bets, of moving forward and actually changing the way people actually use software. I think, having to learn a bit of software like BuildPass should be the days of yesterday. You shouldn't need to necessarily learn that. Using your voice or using text could be quite intuitive. And I think that's something that's really important for us to do. It's really accessible for a lot of different people. And especially as we move into new markets with new languages that aren't supported today traditionally by that software as well. So really opening it up and seeing kind of where it goes. It's one of our big bets, and it's part of why we wanted to raise money to help kind of speed this up, actually, to leverage this product that we built today in new ways that we hadn't even thought of yesterday. So
yeah, that's awesome. I'm really excited to see where that goes, because I can see that vision, and I agree with you. Like, it doesn't need to be hard, and I really feel like you can make the whole process much easier. That's awesome. Okay, I'll ask Mark Green, like, what's next for you guys?
Yeah, so I guess the first example we've talked about today has been very external face, and now we're looking more internal in terms of improving workflow patterns. Obviously, in the medical scenario, different people respond in different ways, but now that we've been in the industry for a long time, we've got a lot of data, and so it's really harnessing and mining that data to try and improve efficiencies around how patients come through surgery and how they do pickups, they do treatments. Because that can be quite a challenge because of the different nature of different logistics, different teams working together. So that's definitely an efficiency gain that we're looking around the company. But I guess we'll also look more in terms of some of the patient journey as well, and customer satisfaction, engagement, and different ways for them to get information out of us and make sure we're a point of difference to other providers. That's the key thing. I think that people feel that they can have that information 24/7 if we can make that available for them. That's really what we want. People are running very busy lives, so if we can help that and make sure you don't have to try and fit with a doctor's appointment or whatever, then great, that's what we're doing. So yeah, both a combination of internal and external, both work efficiencies and patient journey for us. Yeah,
nice. Your vision is very clear as well, Mark, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how yours goes as well. We're at time. We had a lot more we wanted to share with you, apologies, but I am very cognizant that everybody has a really busy day. So we will be gathering some of the answers to those questions and following up with you. I'd like to thank our panelists, Mark Green, Mark Foer, and Aaron, who are kind enough to share their insights with us today. I think it's a great example of the diversity of innovation and exploration that we're seeing across so many different industries. And Aaron said, if you'd be kind enough to rate today's webinar, that would be very nice of you. But big thank you to our panelists. And I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. And if you're wanting a link to the recording, you just look out for an email in your inbox, and there'll be one there for you very, very, very soon. So yes, please do tell us how you found today's webinar. We're always looking to improve. But yes, thank you, Mark and Aaron, for your time today. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I hope you have a great day.
I think